Peace, family. Y'all know who it is. It's Dr. Bakari K. Lumumba, progenitor of LumumbaSpeaks.com, Black Empowerment Initiative, where we believe we could gain a competitive advantage while always betting on Black, in conjunction, once again, with Bequaline Network, the Pan African social media extraordinaire, and the home of African Centered News and Information. Very happy, family, to be back with you all on this Saturday evening. Happy Pan African Saturday, as a brother Sandman would say. Happy April 18th, 2026. As many of you may be aware or unaware, but today is, of course, Independence Day in the Republic of Zimbabwe. So definitely want to show love to our brothers and sisters in Zimbabwe who had their independence recognized, of course, on April 18th, 1980. So to everyone in the country of Zimbabwe, particularly the capital Harare, we definitely want to give you all, wish you all a happy Independence Day and hope things are, of course, making a turn for the best, of course, in that great republic. So once again, family, if you're watching, make sure you hit the subscribe and like button, thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. Make sure you hit that notification bell. You're watching, of course, on LumumbaSpeaks.com, Black Empowerment Initiative, where we believe we could gain a competitive advantage by always betting on Black, in conjunction, of course, with Bequaline Network, the Pan African social media extraordinaire, and the home, I can say once again, the home of African Centered News and Information. And so, just before we get started, family, I think we have a great show for you all this evening. One of the brothers commented, I put out posts on the community tab, and the brother said, listen, between you and Brother Dwayne, there's X number of hours in a week. You all can at least do one or two shows a week. And so I just want to say, I really appreciate the brother really lighting the fire, right? And let us know that our content is needed and necessary, that you all look forward to the content that we're producing. Once again, particularly when we talk about partnering with, of course, Bequaline Network, be able to provide African Center news and information. Then, of course, even Brother Dwayne Omowale, right? We all know that he is, of course, the Pan African extraordinaire. We know that he's your favorite historian, your favorite activist. So definitely always want to make sure we show love to him as well. But I think we have a great show, family. As you all know, the link is in the description. The link will be in the chat. So we will get to that momentarily. But of course, the title of the show is I Went to Church for the First Time in 2 Decades, Why I Will Never Go Back. So I think it's a rather provocative title. And I think the conversation would even be evocative in nature, in which it would elicit some strong reactions and even emotions, right? So I'm aware that many of you may have read my article on Medium addressing this particular topic. If you haven't, please take the chance to go on to the description, click the link, and then you can read the article, of course, for yourself. Really want to just take this time to really address some of the things that I witnessed. Many of you may be aware, I did put up a picture of Brother Dwayne and I. I was actually able to finally be in community with him in person. Flew to Orlando, Florida, to connect with the brother and really champion the work that he's doing in the Orlando area. I think I shared this before on my platform that he had partnered with the church. He had been partnering with the church, First Antioch Missionary Baptist Church, to really do some Pan African work. Many people may say, well, why is Brother Dwayne partnering with the church when, of course, he's taken some very strong views regarding Abrahamic religions and the adversarial or problematic, effect that it has on, of course, the African people and our psyche. But part of being an activist is doing the work where the work is able to be done, right? So it's particularly when we're talking about addressing the material needs of our people. So we would get into that. I talk about that in the article, but we had this conversation. But so I went to, of course, support. And so when I went, what I witnessed led me to say this is why I haven't been in 20 years, nearly 2 decades, and why I won't go back. So definitely, want to really set the pretext for the conversation that we're having and why I think it's needed and necessary. Because oftentimes when you're having these conversations, the flip side or the question that's asked, right, is, so what's the alternative? What is the alternative? And for many of you all, you that know me, and know my work, I am an atheist, right? So I'm in that great line of divine and Pan-Africanists who, of course, atheists. A great example of that would be the brother who created the African pioneer movement, right? So we're talking about Carlos Cooks, right, who, of course, was the ideological son of one of Marcus Garvey, was a member of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, and was from, of course, the DR, right, the Dominican Republic. So he was a brother, an African from the Dominican Republic who knew that he was African. And so we definitely always want to champion our brothers and sisters who embrace their African identity, embrace their Black identity, because we know we live in a world that's, of course, vehemently anti-Black. Anti-Blackness is, of course, omnipresent. And oftentimes we find individuals engaging in escapism, in a myriad of methods. And so we definitely want to champion our great ancestor Carlos Cook. Matter of fact, I would be remiss in my duty if I make sure I'm gonna look him up very quick because I gotta make sure I know his birthday so I can ensure that we do a Black History today's Black History fact for him. Of course, he transitioned to the realm of the ancestors in Harlem, New York on May 5th, 1966. But we definitely want to make sure we honor, of course, when he arrived here on the planet Earth as an advocate as an advocate destined to, of course, champion and work for the liberation, salvation, of course, of African people in order to restore ourselves to our traditional greatness. So before we get started, family, just want to go over some of the ground rules, the basics that we always go over when we have, of course, a live conversation. Number one, as many of you are aware, we do not believe in the use of racial epithets of any kind whatsoever. No racial epithets, and then, of course, no epithets of any kind. This is a space of Black empowerment. We believe in Black empowerment. So if anyone uses epithets of any kind, we would, of course, remove you from the live. Number two, diversity of thought is welcome. So irrespective of your perspective, irrespective of your position, I'm sorry, doesn't matter if you're on the left, on the right down the middle, you could be a practitioner of Abrahamic faith. You could be someone who's, of course, strongly disavows them. Immaterial, you're here able to be part of the conversation. We know that diversity of thought, how someone learns and grows, particularly intellectually, but I argue even as a person and as an adult, we don't believe in having an echo chamber here. Number three, probably most importantly, facts over feelings. If someone makes a comment that you disagree with, I want you to make sure that you're challenging the argument. I say Black power and not the person. And then, of course, last but not least, no fundamentally false statements. You can make a claim based on your opinion, right? But if you were to make a statement that was fundamentally false, of course, I will tap in and, of course, correct you. And part of that is I am a scholar, I am an academic, and so this is my platform. And I'm responsible for the information that's disseminated on my platform. And if I allowed it to take place, is this to be a space of misinformation, hurts my credibility and my, of course, profession. So, and as you all know, here at Lumumba Speaks in Beacon Network, our mission is intended to exonerate or vilify, but to challenge conviction or wisdom and re-examine what has previously been accepted as fact. So once again, family, I'm going to put the link in the chat. The link, of course, is in the description. The article that I wrote is in the description as well, so you all can tap in and be part of the conversation. But long story short, I went there in support of Brother Dwayne, and the issue really was what was being taught at the church, not only in Bible study, but also even during the pastor's sermon. I talked about he had a 43-minute homily where it was just this nonsense that was being spewed. Part of my issues, of course, with Abrahamic religions is they tend to be extremely insular. There's a level of anti-intellectualism, a lack of actual education. We tend to find that oftentimes individuals are seeking to use God as replacement for things they don't actually know, which I think is inherently problematic and leads people to be easily manipulated. We also talk about the deculturalizing apparatus. It's a good brother of mine. He's a marketing executive, and so he's engaged now. So his wife and his fiance, they're going to be married at the end of this year. And so he was asking me about potential, names for the child. And I'm like, well, hey, why would you need to speak with me about that? And of course, for disclosure, the brother's a Christian and his father's a pastor, so he grew up in church. And he's active in, of course, the music ministry at the church. So what ends up taking place is he talked about, wanting to use a biblical name or biblical names for his children. And he said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, do you really want my opinion? He said, that's what I'm asking. And so what ended up inspiring was I shared, well, that's actually a deculturalizing apparatus, a frame of reference, a practice. I said, this is something that hails from, of course, the Holocaust of enslavement, where we unfortunately were stripped of our actual African names, ethnic identities, and given, of course, non-African names, particularly biblical names, right? So I say there's something to be cognizant of. And so his fiance said, well, ever since you had that conversation, he's been looking up African names for our children. So when they really give thanks to that, give things Black power, that we're pushing back against that deculturalization. But that's something that tends to happen, right? When we talk about individuals who are raised, socialized, and of course, these Abrahamic religious institutions. Another issue I oftentimes argue is that the churches use, or the mosque is used as a substitution for, of course, African-centered socialization. So, for example, many of you may have seen Judge Mathis' show. There are a lot of TV shows that kind of deal with troubled teens. And what we tend to find happen is there's a situation where the child is having some type of problems in life. There may be having behavioral problems, academic problems, etc. And then so the question is always, well, are they involved in church? And I always make the argument that that's really they use the church as an excuse or an escape from what proper socialization at home. We know the African proverb teaches us that, excuse me, the African proverb teaches us that the ruin of a nation begins in the homes of its people. So we tend to find the church is used as an escape or an excuse for proper socialization, as if the problem isn't that the child grew up in an environment that did not cultivate and develop his child in a manner to be a functional adult in society. No, it's the solution is that they just have to believe in a particular God and worship and believe in Him, right? And so one of my students, when I was, of course, working at Sacramento State, stated, "Well, what I tend to find, Dr. L, is the church really is just another form of socialization." I said, "I would agree, but it's not really the religion per se. But these people are able to provide structure in one's life." The issue with that, of course, is the structure is rooted in miseducation, of course, deculturalization. So you're looking at, of course, a racial, or ethnic, or religious group outside of course, the African global family as a course of action, or a course of direction in one's life. And so we could go in deeper about why, of course, that tends to be, of course, problematic. One of the issues we tend to find, of course, is this pushback against education and intellectualism, right? We've heard this quite often, where it doesn't matter how much education you have. It doesn't matter how many degrees you have. It doesn't matter how much money you make. All of these things do matter, right? But the argument is, but if you don't know Jesus, is all for naught, right? We tend to find, if I had a conversation with a brother or sister just in passing this past week, where they said, "Yeah, I grew up in church and I was taught all the time." Matter of fact, they said the conversation they had with a pastor probably about a week or two was, "Why are you studying history and politics?" And the young lady said, "But I told my pastor I wanted to understand the world and how it works." And his response was, "Well, that's immaterial." And I'm paraphrasing here. "You simply need to read the Bible." So we see this form of anti-intellectualism, as we know. This makes it easy for someone to be manipulated, right? Easy for someone to be manipulated. And the reality situation is, what we want is the capacity and ability to actually understand the way the world works, particularly in terms from an anti-Black perspective, then being cognizant and knowledgeable of those disruptions in our history and culture, and be able to overcome them. But it's going to be very difficult to do that if you aren't able to develop a right, correct, or even healthy analysis of what the problem actually is. So something to consider there. I even argue financially, it tends to create harm as well. I saw a post on social media maybe about a week ago when someone said, "Well, if people took that 10% they were paying in tithes to a church and actually invested in or bought stock, maybe we would be doing a lot better financially on a macro level, holistically as a community." But I wrote this article on all these issues before. We have an entire, of course, playlist on our channel about Abrahamic religions. But I wrote this particularly due to what I saw take place at that church in or the greater Orlando area, of course, First Antioch, where the pastor were making claims that they're just absolutely were not only nonsensical and ahistorical, but reverse the facts. He made a claim that slavery was part of God's will. And so that we shouldn't, he made a claim that we shouldn't complain about the suffering that we faced here as African people in the diaspora, even on the continent, because we didn't suffer as much as Jesus. And so I don't like engaging in the oppression Olympics. This is something that we typically find coming out of the academy. Some would argue this is something that oftentimes we find being promoted by feminists, right? I know from being in the academy, I've kind of got that argument from feminists. But the issue is, historically, it would be false. So let's say Jesus is an actual historical figure, and we know the story. If you read the gospel, and you haven't read the gospel, at least most people are even familiar with the story. But the issue here is, when we talk about the suffering that African people face, it actually does supersede that of Jesus the Christ, right? We're talking about being burned alive. We're talking about being beaten to death. We're talking about being skinned alive. We're talking about being forced to eat on our own excrement. We're talking about being brainwashed to hate oneself. We're talking about being victims of repeated sexual assault, rape, right? So just from a historical standpoint, extremely problematic what was being articulated. There was even an argument, we're talking about back to the anti-intellectualism, this focus on self-loathing, which is practically part of the religious doctrine, this concept that we're filthy rags and we're nothing without, of course, Jesus. But the pastor stated that we can't even pay all our bills. and that if we could, we wouldn't know what to do with ourselves. So we should give thanks to God for that. So I'm almost insinuating that financial struggles in one's life is somehow part of divine providence, right? Absolutely nonsensical, right? So these were some of the things that were being promoted, and this is one of the reasons I don't go to church, because I know if you do, you're going to hear some stupid shit. It's going to be quite honest with you all. But to hear that, and I even talked to some brothers who I'm pretty cool with, who are ministers, and they said, well, this is God being paid by white people, right? Then the argument, of course, was, well, this individual, this pastor, is doing some tangible work. We're talking about Water Filters Togo. If you all know, uh, on my platform, we've actually scheduled a post each week where we're going to be supporting that initiative, Water Filters Togo, because it's addressing the material conditions of our people, and having access to clean drinking water is of utmost importance, particularly when we talk about just a material issue, the life expectancy, etc. Many of you may be unaware, but Togo, unfortunately, is one of the least developed countries in the nation. We know we did a show earlier this week, Forward Must Go, talking about of course, the Naskenbay family dictatorship that's been in office, been running the country for over 50 years. But so that's great work. The other issue is, of course, school supplies to Malawi. And then, of course, they even give food and clothing to the homeless. And so the issue I had was that they may be addressing some material issues, but the message that's being disseminated from the church actually normalizes material suffering as part of God's plan. And so that's why I argue that the work that we do needs to be holistic. And so I had a conversation with Brother Dwayne about this, and I said, hey, you have to say something, right? I've been in a position before where I'm working with the church uh, in the community on a particular initiative. And we know churches are omnipresent, and we know that typically they do tend to do more work than individuals, right, or grassroots organizations, because they have an institutional advantage, right? And that institutional advantage is they have a brick and mortar institution that's tax exempt, and they have doting parishioners who are going to show up no matter what, right? So when we say that, we know that irrespective, and this is documented here, you can have the pastor sleeping with members of the congregation. You can have the pastor impregnating underage girls. Parishioners are still going to show up. You can have situations where the pastor has been accused, and there's evidence to strongly uh, suggest that he's engaged in inappropriate sexual activity. People are still going to show up, right? So that plays a role in them being able to do more simply because they have the numbers, right? But it doesn't take away from the critiques, right? And so the second issue is oftentimes brought when we're having these conversations is, what is the solution? Right? Elijah Muhammad stated that if you're going to tell people not to do X, you have to give them an alternative. And I argue the alternative is education. Right? One of the best ways to address that is by opening Juma Mosi Shoelace. Right? I'm here in Dayton, Ohio right now. There's a mother, Mama Olabisi, right, who of course is married to Barbara Kwaku Lay Franklin Crow. She was a Juma Mosi Shoelace mother in the Orlando area. She said that I told her I would be willing to help her with that, because oftentimes what we find is, of course, Jewish mythology is used to replace actual history. We want to promote a level of criticality, of course, education, etc. And we find that's typically not being done from the church. But the biggest issue oftentimes is we want to also promote learning from a culture congruent frame of reference. We don't want our frame of reference or perspective to be outside of our culture, history, and of course heritage, right? So these are some of the issues, family. Uh, but you would have to been there, right? It was absolutely nonsensical, the sermon that the preacher gave, and even some of the comments that he was making, of course, during Bible study, where he, for the most part, was really glamorizing and romanticizing Jewish settler colonialism. So a number of issues to really be concerned with, but once again, the link is in the description. The link is in the chat. Tap in, be part of the conversation. We'd love to hear from you all. Put a 1 in the chat if you read the article. Put a 2 in the chat if you haven't read the article. And of course, let me know if you follow me on Medium. If you don't, of course, I can definitely provide you all the link to follow me on Medium, where I write timely articles. And now I write articles on Medium due to, of course, being influenced by Brother Dwayne Omawale, once again, a resident historian, who actually said, hey, this is a great way to promote your message, right? But also as a way to make some passive income. So definitely, family, please let me know if you've read the article. Put a 1 in the chat if you read the article. Put a 0 in the chat. I'm sorry, a 2 in the chat if you haven't. Sister Afree, I just need you to cam up in queue. You don't have to cam up on a live, but I need you to cam up in queue just so I can make sure that you're not scamming, because we've had people do that before. So if you could cam up in queue, that'd be greatly appreciated. and then you could turn your camera off, and I'll bring you into the live. So, sister, a free A, maybe a free or a free A. Yeah, if you could just come up in queue, that'd be greatly appreciated. Then we will bring you into the live. Once again, you do not have to cam up on the live. Anyone who's watched my platform knows that. You also can use a pseudonym as well. Okay, so one moment, no problem. Yes, once again, you don't have to cam up on the live. I understand a lot of people for numerous reasons that what, not important to me. You'll have to share that with me. May take umbrage with being on a live, people knowing who they are. I understand that 100%. So what you can do, of course, is simply cam up in queue so that I know that you're not, you're not scamming and anything like that, because we've had people do things like that. And then, of course, you could turn your camera off, and I will bring you into the live with your camera off, and then you could be part of the conversation, because I definitely want to hear what people have to say. So Melody Haitian Millennial says yes, he read the article and I felt seen. Okay, peace, brother. He said he felt seen. So what do you mean when you say you felt seen? Melanated Haitian Millennial. Okay, very good. Mr. Sandman, appreciate that. And so here's the other issue. I also understand the role the church plays. We know the role the church has played historically, but we also know it provides people a sense of community, right? Particularly a space where people are able to congregate and fellowship with individuals who have shared values. I know that because I grew up in the church. One of the benefits of growing up in the church is I engaged in public speaking at a early age. I'm talking about as a toddler. My parents have pictures where the microphone I'm holding is about big as my body, right? So there are some positives that could come from that, but I'll argue we can duplicate those positives in an African-centered environment, right? So because what we don't want to do is what many brothers and sisters, back home or around the way would say, we don't want to hustle backwards. We don't want to help ourselves on one end, but hurt ourselves on another end, right? I always argue that this is analogous to when you watch a commercial where they're promoting a new drug, right? And they say, well, this will address your heart issue. And then at the end of the commercial, say, but it may cause you to lose your foot, right? And most people would say, well, I might as well just take my chances, right? So I argue that on the back end, it does more harm than good. So Sister Free, once again, if you could just cam up very briefly in queue, we appreciate that. You could turn your camera off, and I could bring you into the live, because I definitely want to hear what you have to say. Most importantly, we don't get a lot of sisters in the live, right, on the lives, and we definitely, respect the sister's opinion. We know that part of course, our practice and belief. Got you, sister. So you can turn your camera off, and then I'll bring you in. Part of the practice as a community is that we work collaboratively with our brothers and sisters rather than in competition. So once again, sister, if you could just tell me how to pronounce your name correctly.
It's a free. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
It's a free. It's a free.
Okay, very good. So where are you calling in from, if you don't mind me asking?
Georgia.
Okay, shout out to the Peach State. Okay, I know that's right. Are you in Atlanta area or downstate?
Little further out. Well, I know I am. I'm sorry, I just moved. So I'm in Tucker, so the kind of the outskirts of Atlanta.
Okay, very good, very good. So the floor is yours.
No, I'm listening, and I'm hearing your journey. I've been following you for like a couple years now. That's my first
Okay.
time.
Appreciation. First time caller. Okay, very good. Appreciate that.
I myself consider myself as a Pan-Africanist.
Okay.
Georgia is a beautiful place to be a Pan-Africanist because you see all types of different Black people,
Mhm.
and
Yes.
like we're all on the same code. The thing I wanted to comment about was like your religious journey, or
Yes, ma'am.
perhaps like your obstacles. I too had like a falling out with Christianity,
Okay.
but I haven't stopped being religious.
Okay.
I'm reverted into Islam, right? My
Okay.
issue was
Real quick, some people would argue that that's a lateral move from one Abrahamic religion to another, but go right ahead.
and I got you. But here's my thing. I felt like I'm able to think and use my brain a little more than um, when I was
In
a
the church.
Christian.
Okay.
When I was in the church, right? A Christian
Could you
in the
give
church.
some examples of that, if you don't mind
But
sharing?
so, and this is just my particular experience. So an example would be, you know, growing up, I'm 35. We still have like white Jesus around in the church, and when I would
Right.
ask questions about that, it was like very taboo, or it's very like people get uncomfortable. Like I'm talking about Black people now. They'll get very uncomfortable about me asking, why do we have like why do I have to why does Jesus look like Jim Carrey? You know, like I
Okay.
ask questions like that. I also had an issue with how I was treated. I grew up in a very kind of colorist, kind of anti-Black church
Okay.
amongst Black people, right? And mind you, we're all Black, and even my mother, my mother's from Liberia. Both my parents are from Liberia, so like even
Okay.
in
Shout
like the
out to
African church,
Monrovia. Okay, let's get it.
yeah, yeah. So even like in the African church, there's still white Jesus, and
Hmm.
so I had an issue with that, right? So my thing is that the type of Islam that I came into, and I say the type because everybody has their own experience, right? So I want to
Right.
allow for people to, express themselves. The type of Islam that I came into allowed me to use my brain and to question things, and I still question things. So now it's like I'm more comfortable with having conversations about religion to people who may be agnostic, maybe
Mhm.
atheists, because I'm more comfortable in myself. When I was Christian, I wasn't able to do that. And
Okay.
one last thing is that in Islam, we believe that um, there were that Allah sent 319 prophets.
Hmm.
So each group of people on the earth received their prophets. So in that sense, I don't have a problem with our people practicing indigenous, by indigenous I mean African, right?
Hmm.
Indigenous religions, because I don't believe that God would uh, uh, say that because you don't practice Islam specifically that you are not of Him.
Well, I would say this based on Islamic theology. And I can speak to this because I minored in religion in college. Uh, all Abrahamic religions, if you are a non-believer, you are, according to the theology, punished and banished to hell. The other issue with Islam, and of course, I'm not seeking to disabuse you from your religious belief. That's not the goal, of course, of this live. But Islam has a long and virulent history of anti-black racism from its inception. I don't know if you are familiar with the term abd, of course, in the Arabic
Yeah, of
world,
course.
right? So yeah, so you know the history, and so these are some things to consider. And we do find a very and like Christianity and Judaism, there is a strong practice of female subordination as well. But to each his own. As long as you are cognizant of those things, right? Matter of
I'm
fact,
cognizant and I have arguments, but I'll let the other person speak before
I
I.
mean, no, so yeah, actually, so we could come back. In Islam, there's actually a term. I think al-jahila. I may be pronouncing it wrong because Arabic isn't my first language, but they argue that African culture is rooted in is nothing more than pure barbarism, a time before civilization. So it's
Because the issue is that Muslims are not supposed to, like, there's no we also always say there's no compulsion in religion, right?
right, but
That's not
that's Islam in writing, not Islam in practice.
and so that's what I'm saying. Like when I want people to make the distinction.
Hmm.
We don't force people out of their Islam is not supposed to force people out of
Right,
their
but it has a long
cultures.
history of doing so, particularly the African people.
It has a long history of being weaponized, and so I think the question that most people are wanting to ask is that if this religion is so sacred, how can it be weaponized against me? I think
Well,
that's what we have to
I would
ask.
argue from an African-centered frame of reference that it's not. I would argue that from an African-centered frame of reference, and we actually find this historically to be accurate, that one of the justifications for the enslavement of African people by practitioners of Abrahamic religions was that we didn't practice Abrahamic religion. As a result, based on their religious books, we were ripe for enslavement. And all of this stems from, of course, the concept of the curse of Ham, right? That comes out of the Jewish Talmud, which we know Christianity and Islam are a derivative of, of course, Judaism. So there's a long history there. So it's not even an issue of being weaponized. It's actually part of the doctrine that African people are seen as rightful enslavement, dehumanization based on the curse of Ham. And this is something that, of course, the Jewish Talmud was written between the 3rd and the 5th century by rabbinical scholars who were providing a rabbinical interpretation of the Torah.
But we do know that to be a misinterpretation.
Well, no. It's not a misinterpretation. Like they actually, because I have a copy of the Talmud. They actually state people who are descendants of Ham have crinkly hair, dark skin, big lips, wide noses, elongated penises. And they arbitrarily
That sounds very Black to me.
Yes, yeah, they arbitrarily. And so this is the issue with the history. And very quickly, Dr. James Sweet, he may be retired now, but I do know at the time that he wrote the article, he was a professor of African history at the University of Wisconsin. He wrote, this is absolutely phenomenal article titled "The Iberian Roots of American Racist Thought." And he goes through the history of how Abrahamic religions were created anti-Black racism, and then this was shared and taught to Europeans during the Middle Ages. And this is like he has first. So we know in history you have what primary source and secondary sources. He cites primary source information, documents to substantiate the claim, right? So of course I had to read this stuff because I got a master's in African studies, but appreciate that. Appreciate the super chat, Wilson Garvey. Shout out to Haiti, South Passe. But so this isn't even a misinterpretation. This is the actual history. Like Jewish people simply are arbitrarily attributed this to what African people put this in writing. This became part of the religious doctrine. This was passed on to Christianity and Islam as well. In fact, there are several. There's a large amount of scholarly historical literature on anti-Black racism in the Islamic faith. A large amount. I had to read this stuff, of course, in my PhD program, but I'm not trying to disabuse you of your religious.
No, you're good. This is actually.
I have people who are friends who are Muslims. Matter of fact, one of my young boys, I'm a mentor of, we went to the gym early this morning and got it in. He's a Muslim, but he, of course, is aware of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to respond to that, but I want to kind of bring some things up. So you can just give me a minute.
Okay, Brother Dubs.
Hello. How you doing?
Peace, family. What's the word?
Peace to you. Nothing much. Islam is I think it's anti-African. And the one thing that bothers me about Islam, I think it's extremely Arab-centric. It's too Arab-centric for my liking.
It is. Dr. Golly, my brain isn't working this evening, family. Please forgive me. Molefi Asante, of course, he is considered the father of Black studies. He created the first PhD program in Africology, Temple University. He's chaired over 80-some dissertations in Africology, African studies, or Africana studies. But in his seminal text, Afrocentricity, he talks about, and this book was published in 1980, he talks about the Arab-centric nature of Islam and how that is, of course, antithetical to African cultural practices in religion. And he talks about, of course, female subordination. He talks about the fact that, of course, in traditional African religions, there is no concept of prophets or revealed scriptures. He really goes in, right? The concept that you have to turn to Arabia when you pray. The fact that there's at least a cultural or belief or pressure to take, or social pressure to take on the Arab name. He really, goes in detail. And he even talks about, he mentions this in the book because he says, in Black studies, people always provide an African critique of Christianity because of our direct connection to, of course, enslavement in the enslavers' religion. But most people are unaware that Arabs and Muslims were the first to actually enslave Black people on the basis of race, right? And so he talks about that, of course, in his text, Afrocentricity.
Well, this happened over 1,000 years.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And so we're talking about since the inception. Matter of fact, we find out. I'm sorry, brother. I do apologize. I'm going to shut up. We even find that there was a process where, of course, Prophet Muhammad and his armies, when they went to invade North Africa, they came to, of course, the libraries in Alexandria, right? These were, world-renowned libraries where there's a lot of information. And they said, well, this information is very important. They said, well, if If it agrees with what the Quran says, it's superfluous. And if it doesn't agree with what the Quran says, then it needs to be destroyed. Right. And so these were wars of aggression, even though the Quran states that you're not supposed to engage in religious wars of aggression, even though they actually were. Right. The other issue, of course, in Islam is that there's a belief that when you transition, when you die, when you go to heaven, everyone would speak Arabic. Right. So these are examples, of course, the Arab-centered nature of Islam. As a matter of fact, I remember in the book, Afrocentricity, Dr. Malefic Asante stated that if God doesn't speak to you in your language, then guess what? That's not your God. He actually states that in the text.
So, quick question, Lumumba. I'm sorry, Dubs. I got a question for you as well. You see, like, the different Muslims in West Africa, right? And you see how they practice Islam, right?
Yes, particularly Senegal, where they don't engage in a form of Arabization.
Yes. So, do you think that that's wrong? That's the wrong way to practice?
No. I think it's great if if an African or Black person can practice a non-African religion and maintain their cultural and ethnic identity. I think that's absolutely phenomenal. But what I will say that according to the religious doctrine, that would be considered apocryphal. So if I was a Islamic scholar speaking from a Islamic scholarly perspective, that would be considered apocryphal. But I'm not an Islamic scholar.
And when you say, when you say that would be considered apocryphal, are you referencing the Hadith? Are you referencing the Quran? Are you referencing historical? What are you referencing exactly? Yes. Who said that it would be apocryphal?
Well, yes. So in terms of, I'm glad that you asked that question. Well, it'll be all encompassing, right? Because there is a cultural or a social expectation in the Ummah, right? That when you make, I forget the term that's called when you actually make declaration of faith, right? That you take on an Islamic name, which is actually an Arabic name, right? So that is a social expectation. And to not do so could, if you are in the Ummah and you're with individuals who are hardcore, rather dogmatic, right, rather strident in their faith, that could lead to some issues. And for example, in terms of if I would consider apocryphal, if one did not maintain their cultural or ethnic identity, and there's a good brother B. Quillan, who of course is the co-progenitor of course, this platform. He's from Sierra Leone. He grew up in an Islamic home background, of course, went to Quranic schools, etc. And of course, Freetown, he talked about in many places on the continent, if you go into, or not on the continent, even outside the continent, if you go into the mosque with African clothing on, you will be told to leave or told to take off the African clothing. So
yeah, so I think that kind of proves a point I was trying to make earlier, and I'll say this and let the other person go, which is that Islam is Islam. How people practice it in maladaptive ways, right? Certain people, certain individuals, right? But Islam still remains Islam. So when we say things like Islam is Eurocentric, that's not supposed to be the case. Some people who has been practicing Islam are Eurocentric, are racist, Arab-centric, all of that.
But if I could, it's not an issue of because somebody's the nature of the religion is Arab-centric. According to Islam, the language of God is Arabic. The most important prophet is Arabic. The holiest place in Islam is in Arabia, right? When you die, everyone would speak Arabic in heaven. The nature of the religion is Arab-centered. So it's not like some people practicing that way. The foundations of the religion are Arab-centered.
I'm talking about in a way like how people practice it in a way that is anti-African. You get me? Like if that the Quran was written in Arabic doesn't mean that the Quran is anti-African, anti-Black.
Well, I'm not saying it, but we're looking at the history of the religion. The history, the practices of the religion show that the religion has a long history, and virulent history of anti-Black racism. So, that's just the reality.
Okay, I have my thoughts, but I'll let somebody else go.
Well, this the thing, man. It's still well, people that go to the Middle East that's black, they still get treated poorly. Even like
That's,
Mauritania is still like a lot of racial tension.
that's
Like
true.
still to this day. So you can't and then Christianity get a pass. People always talk about Christianity, but Islam did the same thing. So
Yeah.
in Muslims, a person that was a Christian or like open, like American or something, they'll criticize Christianity. But it's like Islam did the same thing. The NOI good for that. And
Muslims did
I always
did the same thing. Islam does not
no, but
teach.
this see they follow the Quran like them.
They follow, but let me tell you something. Let me tell you something. These people, especially like, I guess to not get, I don't know how this works on YouTube, but there's certain words that gets you banished, so I'm going to
Right.
avoid saying them.
Right. I appreciate you doing
certain
that, by the way.
Yeah, certain T groups, right? They can read the Quran left to right, that right to left. They can remember and memorize each word in the Quran, but they don't comprehend what's in the book.
Yeah.
They can just recite it. So people who call themselves Muslim, again, it goes back to who are the people who are doing these things,
Well,
these T groups.
well, I would say this much. I've read the Quran, and there are surahs in the Quran that state that you should delete people who are non-believers.
Do
I
not
mean, for
take
example,
Christians and Jews as friends.
there's a story in the Quran where it talks about
Like,
hold on, where they talk about that the
mhm.
man deleted his son, and they said, well, why? And they said, well, he was a non-believer, and he could have influenced his family to become non-believers. I mean, this stuff is in the Quran. So it's not like
It's in the
And then
Quran, but in what context?
the
with the
context, like
context of
that's
the person. Hold on. The context was the person was deleted because they were a non-believer.
true, man. If someone came to the present day in one of the Middle Eastern countries, bro, as a Christian,
Yes.
there's gonna be some pushback, bro. It's not gonna be just freely how it is in some of
No,
those
because
Islamic
when
countries. And then you like Prophet Muhammad is an Arab, but you do
So,
African with an Arab prophet. That just don't make sense.
so it's
You
so
greet
for.
each other.
I'm sorry,
What
brother.
now?
Go
Okay, I was
go
gonna
ahead. Go
say
ahead.
you even greet each other in Arabic. Like Assalamu alaikum. Like, why am I greeting each other in Arabic, bro? Then man, you don't have to, but people get Arab names. And then Prophet Muhammad came to the Arabs. I tell people that's totally unrelated to West Africa. That's unrelated to Pakistan. That's unrelated to Indonesia and all them other nations.
okay, one
So
more thing.
what am I doing messing with Islam?
Let me say one
So
more
I'm gonna
thing,
let
and then
but okay, yeah, go ahead,
I'll go.
sister free, and then I'm gonna let
One
brother
last thing,
LMA.
because I gotta because my husband just came home. So I'm gonna give you an example, right? In West Africa, they use the Arabic script,
Mhm.
but they adopted Islam, right? And they use the Arabic script, but they use the Arabic script to write in their own languages, right? And so, like in West Africa, during a certain point in time, Islam was a unifying concept.
I would
Unified different,
argue.
I, but
I would say that's ahistorical. That claim that you made that it was unifying, because we actually find that when Islam came to the Western Sudan and the Sahel, it actually caused division between
when
those who
it
actually.
came, because when it came, it was through when Islam came, it was through
You're breaking
trade.
up. Go right ahead.
My bad. It was through
Go
because
go ahead.
people like to reference um, the wars, but they
No, no,
don't reference like,
I'm not referencing the wars. I'm talking about when it came via trade.
okay, go ahead, I'll listen.
Yeah. So even when it came via trade, it caused a schism, right? Because then you had individuals, particularly, once again, Wilsonian and Garveyite, we want to make sure we attack the argument, not the question. That's one of the core values of Lumumba Speaks. Most of the elites in the Western Sudan adopted Islam, and they became a schism where they began to look down on individuals who were practitioners of African faiths, and of course they would not even buy, sell, or trade with individuals who were practitioners of traditional African faiths. And so it actually, and the other aspect of was it actually helped promote a form of self-abnegation in which individuals started to disavow their African heritage and ancestry and started claiming that they came from the East. Right. And so we see this concept of course, self-abnegation and deference to, of course, an Arab identity. Right. Matter of fact, there's a sister, she's a former professor at Purdue University. Right. And she wrote a book, and real quick, family, because I'm going to bring this up, and this is very important. You know, we always want to cite scholarship here, where she wrote a book, and she's now at the University of Michigan, of all places, right? Which sucks, but for me, right? But for this reference, we're going to, of course, cite her. I'm trying to see if I could pull up this this article or the book. Give me one question. Give me one second. Yes. So this is a sister, Saud Abdul Kabir. She wrote this book, Muslim Cool, Race, Religion, and Hip Hop in the United States. But one of the things she talks about is not only the history of anti-Black racism in Islam, but also the role of self-abnegation and racial deference, right? And so she talks about this. So the concept and idea that, of course, Islam was a unifier. She said she's still listening. We have to finish this conversation another time. Okay, great. That Islam was a unifier to African peoples is not true, right? Because we actually find that African people were already unified due to, of course, the Mali Empire. And the Mali Empire was a secular empire because we know that the Mali constitution, the Kurgan Fuga, was a secular constitution. So I would argue respectfully, sister, that you would need to do more actual research on actual history. Because and we get this a lot of times where you kind of get, I would argue, right? I can say this because I'm a scholar in this particular field and I know the history, that you're giving a narrative, right? Not the actual history of what actually took place and transpired and the role it played in actually providing a schism amongst African peoples in the Western Sudan and particularly the Sahel. So I understand what you were stating, but that's just not accurate if you've studied the actual history of the role Islam played in West Africa during the Middle Ages. Brother LMA, go right ahead.
What's going on, Dr. Lumumba? Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine. Shout out to the brother that dribbles down in VA.
Hey, you know it, man. Hey, I just had to hop on, man. I'm not getting the notifications for this. You know, I just happened to pop on. I saw you up here. I was like, oh yeah, this is right up my alley. So I definitely gotta drop it.
Have you not have you hit the notification bell?
I did, but I just don't, for whatever reason, I don't get notifications. Like I don't get it's some weird ish going on with my stuff.
No,
so anyway.
So I just want to say, I hear you there. I've had a lot of people tell me they had the same issue. Hey, I'm subscribed. I get notification bells, and I still do not get notifications of when you're about to go live. So
yeah,
it's something with YouTube. It may be the nature of my content, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, it's all good. But yeah, man. No, great topic. Well, great topic. It was, so I guess for me, you know, and to the sister, you know, I hear her, but I can confidently say that all religions are the deification of a certain group of people's culture, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
when a religion is formed, the tenets are going to be the customs of the people who created it.
Absolutely.
So that's why Muhammad, I mean, like I said, Muhammad's going to be Arab because it was created in the Levant. That's just the way, that's just the way it is. Like, and as these cultures, I mean, these religions are connected to a people, and if those people are nomadic, violent, expanded, and expandatory, then their religion is going to be the same thing. You can see it with the Christians, like, because the Romans was an empire that spread throughout the region. Mm-hmm. It will only make sense, well, prior to the Romans, but you get what I'm saying, that, their religion will say, go out to the world and spread the gospel, because you're spreading the gospel the same way your empire is spreading. So the religion is going to take on the aspirations, the idiosyncrasies of the people. And when the country, when that particular religion or the people take over another group of people, they cannot have, when they colonize another group of people, they cannot leave the colonized group with their own cultural
Right.
Icons and stuff like that. It has to be. It has to be replaced because you cannot have a sub. You know, you have to. Your colonized people. It is. It's in the best interest of the colonizer that the colonized people think and believe the way that the colonizer does.
Yeah, absolutely. I can recall, and I'm going to bring this up real quick. Let me share my screen very quickly. Because I kind of, when I was teaching African American history, we talked about the history of anti-Black racism. I even talked about some of the comparisons between Islamic enslavement of African people and Christian enslavement of African people. And that many scholars argue that African people were treated worse under Islamic enslavement. We talk about, of course, Black men being used as mercenaries, eunuchs, etc. Black women being enslaved and explicitly for the sake of being a concubine, etc. But of course, I'm citing, of course, Maleficaire Santi's work. As we got him here, he's born in 1942, department chair at Temple University. Of course, he's considered one of the most prolific African American scholars. Has published over 100 books. 500 articles, created the first PhD program in African American Studies in 1988. Has directed over 150 dissertations. Puts his book, Afrocentricity, is an academic theory and approach to scholarship that seeks to center the experiences and peoples of African and African diaspora within their own historical, culture, and sociological context, of course. And then, of course, he talks about his critique, right, of course, Islam from African Center frame of reference. He talks about African submissiveness of Africans to the culture and religion of Islam. Language of God is Arabic. You have the pilgrimage to Mecca. Of course, the most holiest place in Islam, of course, is in Arabia. To effectively pray, one must face Mecca and one must pray in Arabic. Muhammad is, of course, an Arabic man who is the last and most important prophet. And then, of course, his Arabizing customs are important. Name, of course, the name, clothing, female subordination, to name a few. So it's different. And this is why I always tell people, because I used to have students ask me questions about religion when, during my tenure at Sac State. And I said, well, you're in a great place, right? You're at a university. Go to the Department of Classics and World Religions and take some history courses on the religion. And I said, the reason why that is important is because it would allow you to learn about the religion objectively. So you're not already believing in something and then seeking out information that reinforces what you believe, which is known as confirmation bias.
It's a funny point that you made, that you just made, because there's a considerable amount of young students, or I guess young aspiring preachers and pastors who go to seminary, and then when they learn about the Bible outside of the Bible, like the historical context of the Bible, they leave seminary school as atheists. And I always found that funny, because when they go and they're not getting, like I said, they're not getting the narrative, but they're actually looking at the criticisms that other theologians have about the Bible and other religions. They're hearing this for the first time, and then they're expecting, to go to seminary to get answers. And then they go there, they're not giving answers. They're just giving the history, and they can just come to the conclusion that, okay, this isn't real, which, it's just funny how religion works. When I was in undergrad, I took a class, the intro to European history. And the teacher was I think it's the Church of Anglican. And, we're going through like the history of Greece and the history of Rome and all this other stuff and all these popes and shit. I'm saying, bro, how are you still believing this? How do you still know the history of this and then say like, yeah, I'm gonna go to church every day? That's crazy to me. It makes sense for you not to know it and then to believe.
Well, yeah. And for some people, there's an emotional connection that they that are unable to sever. And then for a lot of people, it comes down to quite simply health insurance, right? Where I might as well just believe in this, or I'm at risk, right? So something to consider that. Mr. Sandman, what's the word? Shout out to the Illidale.
Shout out to Ohio. How you doing? Yeah, happy Pan-African.
Yeah, happy Pan-African Saturday. I'm doing quite well. We still have beaten Penn State 9 years in a row, right? And we're gonna make it 10 this year. So hey, I'm doing quite well.
Hey man, anything can happen if Indiana can win the championship this year and upset Ohio State in the playoffs like they did this year.
I'm gonna kick you off this damn platform talking like that.
Did that hurt? Oh man.
Oh my goodness. I thought you were a good person. So Jeff, peace,
Yeah.
brother. So yeah, share with me. Yeah, Sister Shy, I know, right? He talking greasy over here. Sister Shy, she's in Ohio as well. Yeah, health insurance is a real thing. But so talk to us about talk to me about your. I don't know if you read the article or not, but talk to me about your thoughts on tonight's conversation, tonight's topic.
Yeah, man, it's a very deep topic. And when you say that your expertise or your PhD is in African studies, right? Would
Yes,
you say
yes.
would you say that at your PhD or your field of study in the sciences would include sociology or some anthropology, social or cultural history of mankind?
Well, yeah. So, yeah, Africana studies, Black studies, whatever term you want to use, is an interdisciplinary academic discipline. So, of course, there's history. You study religion, politics, culture, sociology, anthropology, archaeology. So, yeah, there are a number of course, of disciplines that you have to study as a result of studying Africana or Black studies.
Yeah, and the reason why I asked that question is because when we're talking about the effect of Abrahamic religions on Black people, not just in the United States, but also in the diaspora and on the continent, that seems like more of a sociological study as opposed to just African study, because
I would agree. I would agree.
because you would say that anytime that you're trying to build a society, right, you need like a culture that you want to build your society around, right? And
Right.
if the United States is based on a society whose fundamental foundation is based in uh, Abrahamic religion, then you would expect the people to assimilate to those Abrahamic religions so they could fit into the society.
Well,
Now,
real quick, I don't know, because many of the founding fathers were deists. They didn't practice any particular religion. In fact, I had the liberty or the privilege, or I would even argue the it was a very difficult process. I had to read the what are those, golly, the papers, Federalist Papers, right? And I think Alexander Hamilton was the one. I think Article 57. He went in detail about why they advocated for there not to be a state religion. So, but I get what you're saying. You can argue de facto that there is a state religion in the United States, but de jure, no.
right, yeah, they say there needs to be a difference between church and state
Right,
because the Europeans who colonized the Americas um, came from a Protestant religion that they were being persecuted in Europe, so they wanted more religious freedom to
right,
practice their own religious beliefs.
right.
So, in in the transition from liberating African people from slavery, after the Civil War, a lot of white nationalists or Christian nationalists believed that Africans wouldn't be able to assimilate into the American culture because they didn't believe in the same theologies that the white people believed in. So do you believe Africans or the descendants of people who were enslaved in the Americans, um it was necessary for them to assimilate to European or Abrahamic religion so that they can fit into American culture? But do you think that was beneficial? I mean, in the total scheme of things, for the Black people that are descendants of
Well,
chattel slavery?
I would say, well, I mean, the reality of the situation is it wasn't by choice. This was a forced conversion process, right? Dr. Ali Missouri, in his seminal text, The Africans, the Triple Heritage, talks about the process of what he calls deculturalization, right, amongst African people in the diaspora. And what took place was this was forced. I mean, we've all seen the movie Roots, or these clips, right, where Kunta Kinte is being beaten until he answers to Toby. The same thing took place in terms of the Christian conversion process. In fact, I even have an article on the Christian conversion. So I'm actually going to bring it up because this is one of the articles I had my students read when I taught African American history. Yep. So we got it right here. Give me 1 second, family. I'm going to pull it up, and then we can actually probably read this together. Because for a lot of people, there's a lot of guesswork that takes place here, right? I don't really know, or there's conjecture or misinformation that tends to derive. But let me read this comment. Let's be clear: the Civil War did not liberate Black people. They did not free slaves. It was an influence of slaves pushing north during the war that had no option but to free them. Understood, brother, but that's not what we're discussing here on this evening. But you're more than welcome to tap in and be part of the conversation. So let me bring this article here, and this is an excerpt from Introduction Studies by Maulana Karenga. This is the 4th edition, and chapter 5 covers Black religion. It talks about religious conversion and transition. Can you all see that?
Yes, it's kind of small
Okay,
on my device, but
let's see if I can do something about that. Give me 1 second. Yeah. Okay, this should make it much better. Okay. Because he gives I think 4 or 5 examples. So he talks about here, of course, Christianity was brought to West Africa by the Portuguese. The enslavers' reasons for Christianizing the enslaved Africans began with the perception of Christianity as a way to enforce, justify, and maintain their dominance. So shout out to brother LMA. He's always cooking because he's the organic intellectual. Let's get it. Let's go, right? So he says, thus, in 1743, a white minister prepared a book of dialogue for enslavers to teach enslaved Africans, which stressed contentment and thanks for being enslaved, and ended saying, I can't help knowing my duty. I am to serve God in that state in which he has placed me. As the indoctrination progressed, then enslavers soon discovered that many of the most amenable and submissive enslaved Africans were those who were Christians. Secondly, the enslavers were equally in that time more so interested in uprooting Africans from their own religious heritage in order to deprive them of cultural distinction and motivation for revolt. Fraser, and this is E. Franklin pointing to, of course, the renowned sociologist who was an acolyte and mentee of course, W.B. Du Bois, points out whites were always on guard against African religious practices which could provide an opportunity for slave revolts, and they outlawed such practices. Finally, enslavers converted Africans because they had they and other whites believed it was their duty to bring light to benign and lost heathens. It was, in a word, based on a culturally chauvinistic assumption that their religion was the only real and correct one, and that all others were pagan and an abomination to their intolerant and jealous God. Right, as we see here, although many Africans accepted Christianity, many others resisted it for a long time, maintaining their commitment to ancient African religions or Islam. Moreover, most of those who accepted Christianity transformed it in their own image and interest. So, as we see here, this is what transpired. So, like I said, I think it's important to always cite scholarship. Many people always ask me the question, well, if you're going to give a critique of these Abrahamic religions, what, of course, is the solution? What is the alternative? And I say, well, history. You actually educate people. You see some history, you provide real education rather than the belief in mythology and, of course, a mythological testorical sky daddy, right? So say sadistic as well, right? So I argue, but to do that, you have to know the history yourself, or you could be an organic and intellectual like brother LMA. And of course, that was an excerpt from chapter 5 of Introduction of Black Studies, 4th edition, by Dr. Maulana Karenga, who's, of course, the chairperson of the head of Africana Studies at California State University, Long Beach.
right, and all of that stuff is factual and documented history that scholars or intellectuals believe is fact. But I draw the analogy to just the football teams that we were just recently talking about, whether you're talking about the Penn State Nittany Lions or the Ohio State Buckeyes. Wouldn't you agree that maybe it's best for the quarterback of Ohio State to be able to throw the ball, 50 times a game and pad the stats, but is it best for the team to have more of a balanced offense so that they can win? And I draw that analogy in terms of whenever you building a nation or you building a society, if you want to win, then you kind of need people to fall in line with what the agenda is for the country. And if that means that, people get sacrificed in the development of that country, then I
So
guess that's do you believe that the what do you call it? That
Ends
term
ends
justify the
justify the
means.
means.
yeah, does the ends justify the means?
So I'm gonna, of course, bring Brother Dubs LMA in, and I'm gonna give that question over to you all, and I'd love to hear what you all have to say.
If I think I understand the question, I mean, for one, any group of people who wants to build their nation, I mean, it's fine to do so, but then what type of nation are they building, right? If you're building empire, expansionist, nation, I think from just an objective perspective, like, no, that's, illegitimate, and, people have the right to reject and to, resist and fight back, so, but like, to your question, if they're trying to, yes, it's a good idea to have everybody on the same page, but if you're the ones getting sacrificed, you may not care too much about, the good of the country if you're being sacrificed, not your sacrifice, you're making sacrifices, but if you're the one being sacrificed against your will, what kind of country are you serving? That's my question.
Brother Dubs,
Yeah, we're Jesus in that analogy, right? We're
Say,
getting sacrificed. We're Jesus in that analogy. We're
well,
getting sacrificed for the good of the rest of the country.
well, see, okay, now that,
real quick, if I could, Brother LMA, I will push back against that analogy simply
yeah,
because this is a situation in which Jesus was able to what? Come back to life. Right. And
yeah,
so, and I even make the argument in my article. I said, is it really a sacrifice if you know that you are all powerful polymath, right? Celestial polymath that can just simply regenerate yourself.
you just had a bad weekend.
Yeah. I mean, are you really dying if you know you could come back to life in 36 hours?
It's a bad weekend.
It's like you're Superman or Doomsday. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
But I want to hear what Brother Dubs has to say, and then of course, Brother LMA, you could provide a retort to Mr. Sandman's statement.
I didn't really recall his question.
Could you repeat your question if you don't mind, Brother Sandman?
Yeah, sure. So the gist of the question is, do the ends justify the means? So if it was beneficial for the country to basically sacrifice the rights and the beliefs of the African people that they used in chattel slavery to strengthen the country, do the ends justify the means? Because at the end of the day, if you want a country to survive or you want a society to thrive, everyone has to get in line with what the agenda is. And if the agenda is Abrahamic religions and the uplift of a particular sociological mind frame, do the ends justify the means in terms of the black person's frame of reference?
For me, I would just say if it's something negative, I wouldn't really stand by it. If I'm hearing your question correctly.
Okay, understood. Okay.
That's what I would say.
Yeah, I guess to put it in layman's terms, we can all agree that the United States is the most powerful country in the world, and it's the most powerful country in the world partly because they exploited the African people for hundreds of years to build themselves up. Now that we are citizens of this country, do you believe the ends justify the means in terms of being a citizen of the most powerful country in the world, yet our ancestors got we got a
The
sacrifice?
raw end of the stick, right?
Yeah. To me, the answer is no. Yeah, no.
And I would even argue that claiming that we're citizens is a bit of a stretch, right? But
Yeah.
I argue that we're actually denizens, not citizens. But I don't know if anyone saw what just took place up the road from me here in Toledo, right? With that young lady the young ladies were, I guess you could say, jaywalking. And a set of the officers telling them, hey, don't walk in the middle of the street. He used it as a way, these are teenage girls, 14, 15 years old, use it as a way to actually say, now you got to give me your ID and your name and date of birth and social. And it was like, well, we don't have an ID on ourselves. We're in high school or middle school. What are you talking about? The guy ends up grabbing her, slamming her into the ground, etc. So these type of things don't happen to people who are citizens, right? If you're a citizen, you're simply told, hey, don't jaywalk, and they're going about their day. So, but that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah.
But I think that's a great question, Mr. Sandman, because, and I'm going to tell you why I think it's a great question. When I began my academic journey at a community college, St. Clair Community College, I was taking like an introduction to African something. I think it was it was Survey of African History. That was the class, Survey of African History. And there was a blog associated with the class. So we could go in there and you kind of, the professor would put out a prompt, ask a question like you did, Mr. Sandman. And it was very similar to, does the ends justify the means? The enslavement, the humanization of African people, the slaughter and genocide of Native indigenous peoples, did that justify, did the ends justify the means because America is such a great nation materially, industrially today? And of course, other people were like, absolutely, yes, absolutely. And so I put on there no, and the answers reflect the fact that these people are sociopaths, right? So I actually put that on there because I remember everybody was, mind you, this is 20 years ago, so everybody was shocked, like, man, like this dude isn't afraid of what white people think. So I remember when I came to class the next week, some of the black people were afraid of me. Some black people was giving me high fives. And I remember the professor ended up shutting down the blog because, of course, a lot of them folks got in their feelings about what I said.
Yeah. I mean, if enslavement is, justifies the ends, how about we enslave you and then, we'll build a nation over your blood, sweat, and tears, and then see how well you like it. Yeah, I can't say that because America is the most powerful country in the world, but what has America done with this power? Think about all of the wars. Think about all the wars that were, let's say, everyone likes to point to World War II as the good war. I'm throwing air quotes. But with all that power, because, after World War II, America became the world's superpower, right? Because everyone else got bombed to hell. I'm sorry, BOMB to Hades. And so America was the only one standing. Everyone had to buy American stuff. America had not the gold standard. After the Bretton Woods, the America currency became the world's reserve currency. We were the most powerful nation in the world. And what did we do? We went to Vietnam, killed and displaced, a bunch of people in Vietnam. We were bombing Laos. We bombed Cambodia. We were bombing Korea. We tore up the Middle East twice. We went in with Desert Storm. We went in with the Iraq and Afghanistan war. Now we're backing them folks over there in the Middle East, and they're committing a genocide. So just like with all of this power that America had, what did they do with that power? And so to me, it doesn't justify the ends. I think if Black people were just allowed, because everyone likes to think that this idea that Black people or Africans in Africa were just sitting around doing nothing, right? We had culture, we had engineers, thinkers, and like you can make the argument that a lot of good stuff came out of Europe. But if Europe had just traded with the Africans or traded with the rest of the world, we would be in a much better place. But no, instead they had to bring that same mentality to the rest of the world. Like, because in Europe they had feudalism, right? They had feudalism for thousands of years, kings, queens, nobles, and peasants, and they were just getting crushed by the upper class, right? And so when they got a chance to get up from under that system, instead of saying that, hey, this system is oppressive, this system is violent, this system destroys lives for no reason, now that we're free, let's create something that benefits everybody. Did they do that? No. Everywhere they've gone, they have murdered and massacred and and assaulted the lives and culture of every culture that they've come across, right? Instead of just saying like, hey, you know what, we don't have to live this way. So I don't know, like I back to my initial point is that Africans had civilization and technology and culture before they came into contact with the Europeans. So they don't need the European to be great. Those countries are already great. And obviously every culture, every group has their internal problems. I'm not saying that. But to say that you have to give up and go through generations of torture, dehumanization, just to be a second-rate citizen in the world's most powerful country. I mean, I'd rather be a first-rate citizen in a middle power country than to be a second-class citizen in the most powerful country. That's just me.
So, brother LMA, if you don't mind, I'm gonna play white devil's advocate. Okay, are you a freedom-loving American?
Yes, I am.
So how? Because it sounds like you hate America.
Well, no,
I mean, if you think about it, if it wasn't for Europeans.
Well, I put it to you like this, white advocate. I would say that I'm a freedom-loving American, and America is not freedom-loving. America was born and built off the back of slavery. So how can you be freedom-loving if you were born if the culture was built on slavery? How can America be freedom-loving?
Well, most as a white devil's advocate, the retort that will be provided by someone who's playing white devil's advocate is that's a lie created by liberals.
By liberals?
Yes, that African people came here as indentured servants, not as slaves.
I would doubt that. So if they were indentured servants, so that means they could have just left at any time?
Absolutely.
They could have just, said, you know what, I'm done here, and I'm just going to be a free, I'm just going to be a free citizen.
And from the literature that I reviewed at my evangelical university, right, Ohio Christian University in Circleville, Ohio, that's what happened.
Oh, well, I know a guy named Dr. Bakari Lumumba you should go talk to, and I think he'll get you straight.
Well, he sounds like one of those black radical identity extremists, so I don't know if I want to talk to him. But
no, he's a well-mannered, freedom-loving African American, and he'll get you right. He'll tell you everything you need to know.
10-4. But once again, family, if you all are watching, make sure you tap in, you hit the subscribe and like button, thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. As you know, you're watching LumumbaSpeaks.com, a Black empowerment initiative where we believe we can gain a competitive advance by always betting on Black, in conjunction, of course, with Beacon Network, the Pan-African social media extraordinaire, and the home of African-centered news and information. If you all haven't noticed, I've put my article in the chat. So if you want to actually check out the article, you can. Make sure you, of course, follow me on Medium. And we're discussing my experience at First Antioch Church in the Greater Orlando area. This article, of course, this show is titled, I Went to Church for the First Time in Nearly 2 Decades, and why, of course, I would never go back. But we're having even a deeper discussion, because that is, of course, one of the arguments that are being made. I remember there's a brother who he has a channel on YouTube where he does a series of shows called Slave Sermons. I think he has over 50, and his content is absolutely phenomenal. I've subscribed, and he talks about one of the myths or narratives that you tend to find growing up in church. Of course, it's the myth of a moral America, right? And we know that America was not a moral nation at its founding, and we can argue it's not even now or at any point in its history. But he said, so this is once again, you tend to find that history is being replaced with narrative, with mythology, with conjecture. And this plays a role in, of course, I would argue, people being easily manipulated, and of course, oftentimes working against their own best interests to restore ourselves to our traditional greatness. So the question I'm going to ask for you all, for the panel, and of course, I appreciate you all being here with me on a Saturday evening, is because the question always comes up. Okay, fine, you have this critique, and just to say your critiques are valid because you X, Y, Z, no problem. What is the alternative?
A quick question: that YouTube channel that you mentioned, do you happen to know what it was? I'm gonna look him up. I think, is it Jeremiah Kamara?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. I didn't want to butcher his name.
Oh, sorry. My bad.
Yeah. And I sent him an email before, but he didn't respond back. Hopefully, I could get him back on. But he even does a episode. I think it's episode 26, where he talks about the level of self-loathing and racial deference, where this Jewish guy comes in and he's doing a mock crowning of Bishop Eddie Long, who had a sex scandal as a king. And he talks about, and he talks about in the video that, what did he say? He says, give me 1 second, fam. He talked about, well, there are 23, how many chromosomes do you have in your body? Is it 26?
46 in between your parents, your mother and your father. You get 23 from each.
Yes. So he says there are 46 chromosomes in your body, and the 40 and the last chromosome was provided by men. Then he says that doctors say that when you look under a microscope, that script Hebrew letters look exactly like human cells, which of course isn't true. So he was saying all these things that were just, of course, were adverse to facts, and the people were just sitting there eating it up, right? And so I talk about this is one of the roles. We're talking about this anti-intellectualism. So people could come in, they could claim they believe in God, they could tell you anything, and people actually believe it. Or even if people don't believe it, they don't question it because they're socialized to not question, right? This is a problem because we know one of the core tenets of Abrahamic religions is, of course, is blind obedience. So
I think what he meant to imply is that the DNA helix resembles some Abrahamic or Hebrew literature.
but they don't. So I mean, even if that was what he's trying to say, the claim he made was completely adverse to facts. And so, and then of course he talks about, when we do this, he has a guy. They have Eddie Long standing there. He stands up. And they put a scroll around him, and he talks about, these are scrolls that we took to Auschwitz and Birkenau, and we took these with us on our clothing because we love the government of God so much. You can see I've watched the video quite a few times because I would show it to my students. And they have him wrapped in a scroll. He said, this is the Holocaust scroll. And of course, Brother Jeremiah says, well, not impressed. I mean, we had our own Holocaust. And he says, so he's covered in blood. He's wrapped in the blood of Messiah. He's going to come out with a new anointing. Then he says, we don't even touch it with our hand. We touch it with our finger, only given to a person of a great authority. And in order to do this, you have to be Jewish. He mentions how only people who have great authority are Jewish. And he talks about on the land of Israel and the God of Israel, I'm going to get this presentation, and I'm able to get this presentation because I'm a Jewish person. And then they start singing in the church in Yiddish or Hebrew. And so nobody in the church even knows what they're singing. So, and Brother Jeremiah says this is an assault to Black people everywhere. But once again, we see the racial difference here because the entire religion is based on this group of people's culture and mythology. One of the great examples I provide from a sociological frame of reference, I had this conversation with my barber today because I had to go get a freshman. You know how I got to get down, you know what I mean? He told me he had joined the church, and I said, well, one of the issues I tend to have sociologically is how like the anti-Blackness of Abrahamic religions is. In Abrahamic religions, there's a prohibition on getting tattoos. Right, your body is the temple of God. You shouldn't do it. But I said in Polynesian and African culture, getting tattoos was a part of a rite of passage. Right, and matter of fact, Dr. Michael Gomez, he's a professor at NYU. He wrote a book about this, exchanging our country marks, the formation of African American identity in the colonial and antebellum South. I mean, this book is so dense that you needed a thesaurus and a Rosetta Stone to figure out the words he's using. It's all in English, right? That's how heavy the book is. So, but this goes back to reinforce that. So when the sister says this was unifying, it actually wasn't. It caused a schism. It caused people to view their culture and traditional practice as something that was negative, something that was barbaric, something that was akin to a time before civilization.
Also, if you don't mind, I would like to give a white supremacist advocate view.
Okay.
They would say that it's in the nature of mankind to be conquerors and exploitative of other people's culture, and that if the Africans who got exploited by the Europeans were able to, they would have.
Okay. But LMA, Brother Dubs, you all want to tap in and provide a retort to, of course, Brother Sandman cosplaying as a white supremacist?
Well, I would argue that, and I don't have the backing for this, and so maybe you may have seen something like this, Dr. Lumumba, that they say that Africa is one of the most linguistically and culturally diverse land masses on the planet, right? And the one thing that we know about warfare is that when one tribe takes over another, diversity kind of shrinks.
Ethnic group.
Oh, ethnic group. When one ethnic group takes over another ethnic group, the loser has to take on the language of the winner. And if Africa is a culturally and linguistically diverse, then you can assume, well, I'll put it this way, I'm assuming that I'm making a presumption that the conflict, while there will always be conflict, it was nowhere near what the conflict was in Europe, because if it was, then there would be far less language groups. You have people who live right across the street from one another, and yet they have totally different languages, totally different cultures, and that goes back centuries before the Europeans showed up. So if they have their same culture, that means they weren't fighting, and that means that they do have the ability to coexist, because like I said, you don't have that many cultures and languages if you can't coexist. So to say that the African, if given the opportunity, would, well, I mean, that's sure, but that doesn't give you the right to massacre someone just because you think that they may have the opportunity to do it to you. Now, it's one thing to fight and to defend yourself, but to go out and preemptively strike somebody just because you think they might do it to you in 100 years, I think that's a what's the word? Not a coward's way, but a colonizer's way of thinking.
Seeing that. Brother Doves, what say you?
I think Africans had the ability to. I think they just didn't. I think, in fact, they actually educated and taught Europeans for some time, I believe.
And so, and I'm going to speak to this and provide, of course, an actual historical perspective and this is something even Brother Dwayne and I talked about offline and even on the platform, where we don't find any evidence of African people during antiquity, the Middle Ages, or even contemporarily forcing their religious views on the group of people that they conquered. There is no evidence to substantiate that whatsoever. And so when someone says, well, this is something that the history shows that was not a cultural practice. And the reason why is because classical, medieval, and contemporary African religions are not imperialistic. There's no belief in proselytizing. As many of you are aware, antiquity, Middle Ages, even today, African religions tend to be focused on what? They're secretive. You actually have to be initiated, right? So there's no practice of proselytization.
Well, as a white supremacist advocate, I would say that maybe you guys are being naive, and that preemptively striking is a part of the battle. And in fact, you need to preemptively strike to prevent the battle, similar to the way is illustrated in the book of by Sun Tzu, The Art of War, or even what we're doing now in the Middle East by us preemptively striking Iran to prevent them from creating a nuclear weapon.
Yeah,
what would you say against that?
But preemptively striking only creates more war. Like, you're not going to continuously be able to preemptively strike your way into safety. It's just not going to work. And I think America and them folks over there going to find that out the hard way. And unfortunately, they're going to drag the rest of the world with them.
But I could give some examples of individuals preemptively striking, and it has worked against them in world history. One would be Germany, World War I and World War II, right? The second would be Napoleon with his wars. A third would be America in Vietnam, right? A fourth would be Russia starting the war with Japan, right? Italy starting the war with Ethiopia, right? So we find that there are examples of individuals preemptively starting wars, and then they get their derriere kicked, right? So I would argue respectfully to Mr. Samuel, who's cosplaying as a white supremacist, that speaks to the expectation that you're always going to win, when the reality is you're not. The second issue I would say, this is someone who served in the military, and if I remember correctly, I think LMA served, and I think Mr. Sandman probably served as well. The individuals who are typically making those claims aren't the individuals who are on the front lines, even willing to be on the front lines, to actually engage in the very behavior and actions that they're saying they want the state to actually engage in.
Yeah, I served in the military. I was in the armed forces as well. But and I'm dropping the cosplaying act that I was doing. The white supremacists are Cosplay Act, and I wanted to like hammer down some because you guys mentioned the vast cultural diversity in the continent of Africa, and how uh, Abrahamic religions don't really relate to our cultures. Now, being that, Africa, the continent of Africa is so large, such a large body, and we all know that, mankind derived from Africa. Now, when you say that Abrahamic religions don't mix with our culture, are you saying that Abrahamic religions don't mix with West African culture? Or would you say that that's not necessarily true in terms of North African culture or East African culture, who might have closer ties to
Yeah.
Abrahamic religion?
So the argument that I make, and I've written about this, is that Abrahamic religions are anti-black in three distinct ways: culturally, theologically, and of course historically. Right? Historically, they're anti-black due to the falsification of African history and the omission of African history. Right? So I will give some examples when we talk about the omission. And I'm going to ask this question to the panel. And of course, if you're watching in the chat, you could put a 1 in the chat. You can answer the question in the chat as well. On what continent did human life begin?
The archaeologists say that it began in Africa, in East Africa.
Yes, LMA, what say you?
Same. Yeah.
But a dove.
East Africa.
Yay, right? If you're in the chat, you could put your answer in there. But according to the Bible, humanity began in the Garden of Eden, which according to the Bible was located in Mesopotamia, the Middle East, and what is present-day Iraq. According to the Bible, biblical text, the Garden of Eden was located between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers flow in only one country. That's our present-day Iraq. So we see the omission of African history. I guess some other examples. According to the biblical text, who was the first person, according to the Bible, to believe in monotheism, the belief in one God?
Abraham?
Right.
I'm assuming the Hebrews, yeah.
Anyone else?
I'm assuming the Hebrews and the Israelites.
Yes, Abraham.
Abraham, yeah.
Now, the reason why that is problematic, because in actual recorded human history, the first person that we know on record to practice monotheism was who? Pharaoh Akhenaten. And we know he's a black man because his mother was Queen Tiye of Nubia. Extremely problematic, because when you go up in church like I did, you're taught Father Abraham had many sons, and many sons had Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. So let's just praise that. See, Vacation Bible School, right? And so once again, when we talk about this concept of racial deference, you hear the song, I'm one of the sons of Father Abraham. So we're being taught to associate our ancestry, our lineage, to someone who, of course, is, of course, Jewish, or of course, according to the narrative, Abraham was actually Akkadian. He came from the city-state of Ur. So you see how problematic this is. That's a problem. I give you another example of course, falsification or the omission. In the Bible, in the book of Genesis, which I've read on several occasions, there's the Tower of Babel, Beelzebub, boldface, whatever you want to call it. Right? God takes umbrage with them seeking to build a skyscraper. The world's, according to the narrative, the first skyscraper to reach the heavens. And as a result, he causes them to speak different languages. Of course, we know this is a mythological story. However, at the same point in time, the Great Pyramid at Giza had already been built. It was the tallest building in the world for 4,000 years. Right? So we see, once again, the omission of African history. Now we talk about falsification. The story of Jewish enslavement in Africa is ahistorical, is a mythological story created in the 6th century by what? King Josiah, when they were returning from captivity in Babylon, to create a national narrative ethos and, of course, origin story. This is detailed in the book. I'm sorry, what's the name of the book? The Bible Unearthed. Right. This is talked about by Sigmund Freud in his book, Moses and Monotheism. Right. Jewish scholars have admitted this. So this just from a history standpoint is extremely problematic. Then we can talk about theological. Right, to where our culture and our religion is considered what? Pure paganism, right? Witchcraft, death, etc. Right. So from a multitude of perspectives, right, we find that these religions are what? Anti-black. And then you go sociological, we could talk about what's the concept of curse of Ham. Like the sister said, well, that's a misinterpretation. I said, I I've read the Talmud. Right? She said, yeah, that sounds like a black place. And I said, no, I've read it. She went to school for this stuff. I had to learn from an African perspective. We had to read these things for ourselves. It wasn't conjecture. The professor wasn't bloviating. I have a copy of the Talmud in my life where it says this distinctively. They arbitrarily attributed it to black people. No rhyme or reason black folk was going to be the ones. And this is part of the theology of the religion. So those will be some examples.
So
anti-blackness in the religion, Abrahamic religions.
So from a theist standpoint, and I think some of these ideas kind of like contradict each other. Anthropologists believe, or archaeologists believe, that the cultures, I mean, being that all humans derive from sub-Saharan Africa, right? East Africa, and Africa is a very large continent.
Mm-hmm.
Archaeologists believe or say that the human or mankind migrated out of sub-Saharan Africa into North Africa and into the Middle East before we migrated to West Africa. So technically, they're saying that these Abrahamic or these cultures from, the Middle East or the Arab or even from Europe are older than West African culture.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up. So when we talk about migration, well, one, that's not even mentioned in the Bible, that they don't believe in migration. The second issue is when we talk about migrating, we're not talking about Homo sapiens sapiens. We're Homo sapiens sapiens. We're talking about Homo erectus. We're talking about a group of people who just had simply started walking on 2 feet, bipedal. We're not talking about Homo, we're talking about Homo sapiens, Homo erectus, not Homo sapiens or Homo sapiens sapiens, which is what we are. Right, so we're really talking about what some people think of when we talk about, of course, in Europe, Neanderthals. This is the level of person we're referring to who was migrating.
Yeah, we can't even call them people because they probably weren't even truly human.
Right,
they were
exactly.
Before human. We can't even. I don't know if we can call it even right to call them people.
Right. Yeah, that's why the scientific term is Homo erectus. And of course, significant amount of scholarship argues that the 3 civilizations during antiquity, the Indus Valley, Mesopotamia, and of course Nile Valley, they all developed independent of themselves. And there's significant evidence to substantiate that, particularly when we look at the civilizations, the social structure of those societies, and the religious beliefs. So, but once again, so the question, because I'm gonna eat dinner in a little bit. What is the alternative? If we're saying these Abraham religions are bad, what alternative do we provide to our people, particularly in terms of how do we address the material conditions of our people, right? Because I mentioned this, and this is one of the arguments when we wrote this article, but the church is doing some good work. And I said, yes, I would support the work, but I believe it's incumbent upon me as someone who's principled, as someone who, of course, believes in being integral, that I would have to say something about the type of language and the type of things that are being taught in the institutions, because they're anti-Black, anti-intellectual, anti-critical, and actually tend to do more harm by putting people in a psychological condition that normalizes material suffering, right? So what is the alternative to these institutions that we believe cause substantial harm to our people, not only psychologically, but also socially and educationally and financially as well?
So I like to say.
Okay, go ahead.
I like to say we need our own institutions, and I think we need to put the right people in the right positions. I think we need to pool our money. So I think it comes down to we need like our own. I think we need to be independent when it comes to a lot of things. And I think I understand the concept of church, but I just don't like the extra stuff that come with it. So like if it needs to be like a gathering, it needs to be extremely beneficial and rooted in like, things that can benefit everyone. But just in terms of, like I just think we need our own institutions and pool our money. I think that's extremely important.
So you're speaking of secular institutions that are culturally congruent.
Institutions
Brother Dubs, are you still there?
I'm still here.
Okay. Yeah, so what type of? I'm saying, are you arguing for secular
Schools
institutions? Okay. Okay.
uh,
That educate. That
that
educate.
educate, also even like hospitals
Okay.
and um, like on community centers as well.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking of community centers. Absolutely.
That would be extremely beneficial.
That serve the needs of the people. Because I've always argued one of the reasons many of our people turn to Abrahamic religions, particularly Church or Islam, one is just a lack of education. They don't know of anything else. Right? Most of our people want to believe in something. We even know the concept and our aspect of being an atheist or agnostic is not something that's germane to African culture, classical, medieval, or even, of course, contemporary. So that's something but I argue because of that lack of education. Also, if you have been groomed and raised and socialized in the church, it typically is going to be you're going to actually have a fear of your own culture. I experienced this. I can recall vividly starting off in my career at St. Clair Community College. Of course, I'm majoring in Black Studies, and as a result of being in Black Studies, you have to actually participate in an extracurricular event that's African centered or African American centered on campus. So there was like a Kwanzaa celebration, and I was so terrified. I said, I'm gonna stand outside and just hand out, of course, the brochures or the flyers, the programs. That's how afraid I was of my own culture due to the years of being in the church, right? So we tend to find that that's an issue. But education would address that, because if you're educated properly, you won't grow up with being socialized and have a fear of your own culture. You won't believe that, of course, the culture or religion that we derive from is rooted in voodoo and is pagan. And well, voodoo is, of course, the name, but it's rooted in witchcraft or devil worship or it's pagan, so on and so forth. So the education would go a long way. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I would like to add that ironically, I will harken back to an Abrahamic term from the Bible in Proverbs 31, chapter 4. It says,
You
"It's
mean
not
verse
for
4?
verse 4, is not for kings, O Lemuel, to guzzle wine. Rulers should not crave alcohol, for if they drink, they may forget the law and not give justice to the oppressed. Alcohol is for the dying, and the wine for those in bitter distress. Let them drink to forget their poverty and remember their troubles no more." And I think that's why we see liquor stores on every corner in the Black community, because the society sees us as the lower uh, society, or the second class citizen. So to forget our stress, to forget our struggles, forget us being poor, they, you know, crowd our neighborhoods with alcohol and drugs,
Mhm.
so that we can forget that we're poor and we can't build ourselves back up. So I think that the key for us is to not cloud our minds with drugs and alcohol, and naturally we would rise back up to our natural states as kings and queens.
So let me ask you this question very quickly, Brother Sam, because what you did just really accentuates something that we were talking about throughout this, of course, program. And that's, of course, the role miseducation plays in with African people and the practice of Abrahamic religion. Are you familiar with any African proverbs regarding prohibitions or the dangers of drinking in excess?
Oh man, I do have a book on African proverbs, but not I haven't read one in particular
Okay.
that,
Well,
talks about prohibition.
I'm going to share. I'm going to share one. This is coming from the book African American Psychology, fourth edition by Alison Belgrave. I can't remember the other author's name, but in this book on African American psychology, they open every chapter with a African proverb, and one of the proverbs talks about drugs and alcohol, the use in the Black community. One of the chapters, and the chapter begins by quoting an African proverb that states that when the chicken or the chicken is drunk, it forgets about the hawk. And then it goes in to describe what this proverb is actually insinuating, what it's teaching, what's the meaning behind it. But the fact that you weren't able to readily identify an African proverb that speaks against the prohibitions or the dangers of drinking in excess, but you're able to cite one from another people's culture, heritage, mythology, etc., is an example, of course, of miseducation.
Well, I would say that a lot of those proverbs probably derive from ancient African culture. So
But be that as it
I'm
may,
still getting to it at the end of the day.
I know, but I'm saying that that would be an example of how our people are oriented in a manner that does not allow them to see positive aspects of virtue, morality, etc., from their own culture. That's just a point that I'm making.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And LMA, what are your thoughts in terms of alternatives?
So I was giving this some thought. There was a YouTube channel, this woman by the name of, I think her name is Britt Harley, and she went to seminary school for Mormonism, and then after that she ended up like leaving the church and becoming an atheist. And she had a YouTube video. She was talking about atheistic spirituality, right? And basically she was talking about why does religion have such a hold on people? Like, what type of evolutionary function does religion, provide? And one of the things that she came up with, I'm going to butcher it, but I think it was, I'm going to come up with, I think she said 4 fundamental fears, but I'm going to name just the 3 that I can remember. The fear of death, the fear of isolation, the fear of aimlessness, and the fear of, I'm gonna say the fear of freedom. She said basically there's no one guiding you. Basically, you are accountable for your decisions, right? There's no God no demons I can blame my misfortunes on, or my lustful desires. I can't blame it on the spirit. It's all me. And the way she was talking about it was that, you think about the fear of death, like we're, as atheists, well, I'm an atheist, I can't speak for you, but I'm saying as atheists, we know that we're going to die. And then when we die, it's it, but some people, as evolution, we have a strong fear of death. So, the thought of an afterlife, soothes us, like it calms our fear that, I'm not going to die. I'm just going to be in heaven with, my creators and my family members who pass away. And religion provides that type of comfort. And the one thing that she said was one thing that is important is to have a spirituality, and I'm putting spirituality in air quotes, and I have a whole thing about spirituality, but just, humor me for a second, that certain cultures that don't have a strong religious component, but they have a strong spiritual component, they will have some type of ritual for the dead. I think in Spanish, not Spanish, but South American cultures and Central American cultures, they had the Day of the Dead, where they would kind of remember their ancestors. And even if you don't believe in the afterlife, it will give you comfort knowing that once I am gone, there's going to be other people who will remember me, who will say my name and think about the good times, right? Even people I've never met, that my story will go on in, throughout my family. So that's, one thing. The fear of isolation, that church provides community, right? Even though, 90% of what you hear in the church is bullshit, it's still community. You're sitting next to people. You are on the same page. You got fellowship, right? So even though what you're believing is wrong, it's better to believe it together than to believe in the truth by yourself, And so another thing about aimlessness, right? When people talk about like what's the meaning of life, right? Religion gives them that meaning. My meaning is to serve God and to spread the word, right? That's kind of silly, but if it gives you meaning, because it's the difference between having meaning and being nihilistic, right? Because when you're nihilistic, you can be, destructive to everybody, right? So, and then what was my last one? Just freedom, the fear of freedom, right? So it's just like, if I can just live my life by the Bible, right? And then something happens to me or doesn't happen to me, then it is because of either God has, it's a plan for me. God is testing me. God is whatever. If something happens to my child, some demonic spirit is attacking my child. Not it's a lack of my parenting skills or the situation that my child is in. It is some, unaccountable force out in the world, in the spiritual realm that's attacking me. So religion provides those kind of safeguards against those particular fears. Forgive me, lack of words, but
because I was telling someone the other day, we find a situation with, unfortunately, with a lot of young men who are struggling. They may be wayward youth, having behavioral problems, struggling academically. The belief is they just get involved in the church. And I said, well, no, that is a poor alternative to proper socialization or African socialization. And one of the things that my cousin just put me onto this week, where there's actually a documentary film called Boys of Baraka that talks about a number of inner city youth in Baltimore that go to rural Kenya to be educated, right? They're getting the type of attention they need from the teacher, because the classroom was 5 students to 1 teacher, right? It was strict discipline. There were no Game Boys, no fast food, right? Oh, wow. They had positive, and of course this was done independent, of course, of Christianity. So it shows that this does work. And I tell people all the time, if you're socializing a child to be a productive adult, that you could teach them to believe in a tree, for crying out loud, as a deity. They would still become a functional adult member of society. But people, because of the socialization, tend to replace the socialization with what? This belief in a particular deity, as if that is going to be a panacea, and we know that it's not.
I don't have to do anything. God's going to take care of it,
Yes.
So
all you have to do is believe, and this was all the problem. In fact, one of the reels I put up on my platform was the guy was talking about to pay your tithes first. And if you pay your tithes first, and then you don't have enough money to pay all your end of the month, God is obligated by the covenant that you have with him. He's going to find a way to provide. And that's just absolutely nonsensical. We know that's not the way the world works, but it also speaks to not only the financial, subterfuge that they're running, but also that focus on anti-intellectualism.
But to my final point, and that the lady Harley was saying, Britt Harley, she was saying that she was thinking about the idea of a secular church or a kind of an atheistic church or whatever, to not in a sense to not parallel, but like to parrot religion, but it's just a unified institution. And one of the points that she was making is that even though religion may do each one of these things, we think of it as a malevolent force in the world, but they don't do it well, but they do all of them together, right? So if you are a secular, like if you're trying to, the fear of death, you have to have one institution that you go to. Then if you want to have community, you have to have another institution you got to go to. If you want to have, get a sense of meaning, you got to go to another institution. Whereas the church can fulfill all of those needs in one institution. Absolutely. So like if you, one-stop shop. So even though, and that's what gives it such a whole, because if I can get my friend, because there's plenty of people who I've come across is that they don't really believe it, but it's just like all my friends, my family, my social circles are in church. I've heard of pastors who they don't believe in it, but they know they can't go anywhere else, because they'll be they're gonna lose their way of life. So I think we do need come up with some type of for us secular Pan-African institution that can just provide social some type of community activism, give us a sense of, and one thing Britt Harley mentioned was that having a place where you can engage in ritual, right? Because ritual is like, we're all doing the same thing, we're all singing the same song, we're all engaging in something that's bigger than us, And she was saying how important that is for community, that you have this kind of rite of passage that we all go through. And I do think that we need something like that. Like I said, a Pan-African secular. To me, I'm like, nature and science. To me, it's just like, it's fascinating enough that I don't need to believe in fairy tales. You know what I'm saying? We got hadron colliders. We got, telescopes that can look into the depths of space. We have real life stuff, not just stuff that we've made up in fairy tales, but we're doing it now. Now, no, obviously, we have to give some type of understanding to people back then, because they didn't have the tools that we have now, right? So it
Right.
would make sense for you to believe in God in 1411, you know what I'm saying? And 17, you know, in 700 AD or 700 CE, it makes sense for you to believe in God. But it, you know, but now that we got so much stuff, you know, we can, you know, come up with all types of, you know, beautiful art, beautiful literature. We can, you know, we got science that can literally, I mean, we literally have, and it's so funny that in this technological world, we have everything that we need to provide everyone with food, shelter, and dignity, and they can pursue their own interests. But we can't do it. And yet,
Right.
all the, you know, because we have nuclear energy that can provide enough power to power the world forever. We don't have to fight over fossil fuels anymore.
Mhm.
We have enough food and food technology that we can feed every single person. We have enough technology in terms of making homes. We can house everybody, but yet it's the religious people who are in the way. We can have heaven on earth. We have to die so that we can therefore go to heaven, when it's the religious people who are preventing us from creating heaven on earth. And
Right.
so,
So, and because I'm about to wrap up, but I just want to say I appreciate that take, brother. You know, when I was having a conversation with someone, they were saying, "Well, all knowledge comes from God." Of course, they were referring to the Abrahamic God. I said, "Well, I would vehemently disagree." They said, "Why?" I said, "Well, the individuals who wrote the Bible, the narrative is that they were inspired, of course, by God. We know actual history shows that that's, of course, adverse to facts, but let's just say that that's true. These individuals believed that the world was flat, while individuals on the continent, classical and ancient African societies, particularly Kemet, and of course, even in the Middle Ages with the Dogon people in West Africa, knew that the world was circular, was a sphere, and that what the sun was the center of the solar system. And these people were not believers in Christianity. So I said, once again, if we look at actual history and education, the claims that you're making are false, but we tend to find that part of people being educated is to allow individuals to be easily so manipulated. Yeah, but I would agree. You know, we talk about this concept of nationalism, and being a Pan African nationalist. Well, nationalism means that you build institutions to serve the needs of the people. So that's what nationalism is. That means you build institutions. You're a nation builder. You're an institution builder. So once again, family, I appreciate everyone for tapping in. Very quickly, I provided the link to my Medium page in the chat, so you could go on, log into Medium, and follow me on Medium so you can get updates on all the articles I write and those that I have written in the past. Please do that to support. Make sure you're a blessing to the show via Cash App, Lumumba Speaks, Venmo, be Lumumba, then of course via the Super Chat. And then I'm going to let each of you provide a final thought before we close out. So we start with Brother Dubs. We, of course, will then move on to LMA, and then we will end and land today's show with Mr. Sandman.
Appreciate the show. I just think we need to unite, organize. I think religion is a detrimental, and that's pretty much it.
Very good. Brother LMA.
Back to my original statement. All religions are the deification of one's culture. So if your God that you serve did not come from the region that you're from, then chances are you got that religion through violence and conquest.
Absolutely.
And so you should, I think the world, we have enough science to look at the world and see how beautiful it is. We don't need to invoke mystical supernatural beings. You're super enough as it is.
Yeah, religious fairy tales, right? Yeah, you're really citing the work. I don't know if you're aware of this. Dr. Jacob Carruthers talks about in his book Intellectual Warfare that, of course, religion is, of course, institutionalized cultural nationalism. So I appreciate that, brother. Organic intellectual, Mr. Sandman, help us land this plane.
Yeah, I would just say that organically and intellectually, that the more that we know, the more that we realize we don't know. So to say categorically that there is no God would mean that we haven't learned enough about what we don't know. Also, I would like to just say, happy Pan-African Saturday, and we gonna make it.
Absolutely. And real quick question, family, to everyone in the chat and you all here on the live. I'm thinking about going live tomorrow morning where we're going to be doing a special Sunday morning show on the Justin Fairfax situation. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the former Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, deleting himself, and of course his wife. I'm thinking about going live tomorrow morning, maybe 9 a.m., 9:30 a.m. What are you all's thoughts on going live tomorrow morning? Would you all be willing to be part of that conversation?
I'll do my best.
Got you.
I'll be here.
Yeah, I'll be available.
All right. Until next time, family, y'all know what to do. Always bet on black. Peace. Before you go, make sure you hit the subscribe and like button. Thank you for supporting the channel. And remember, here at Lumumba Speaks, we always bet on black. Peace.